Let's talk about DeepSeek, because it is mind-blowing and it is shaking this entire industry to its core. The emergence of DeepSeek now putting pressure on the U.S. Last week in Davos, the buzz started growing about DeepSeek's latest AI model being more efficient while running on a lot less advanced NVIDIA chips. Released last week, it's already being called what is a major breakthrough as the app shows its work, its reasoning, it answers users' prompts. I, by the way, was spent basically all weekend playing with it. It is the #1 app, I believe, on Apple right now. The product overtaking ChatGPT today as that on the App Store that way. DeepSeek, which was created by a Chinese hedge fund manager, as we mentioned at the World Economic Forum last week in Davos.
We should take the development out of China very, very seriously.
What we found is that DeepSeek, which is the leading model, is actually the top performing, or roughly on par with the best American models.
If the United States can't lead in this technology, we're going to be in a very bad place geopolitically.
Now, you can take a look right now at the AI-related stocks. So NVIDIA, ARM, AMD, Microsoft, Meta, interestingly, on that list, given it's open source. We got to talk about the open source, closed source bit of this as well.
And then that's a shocker to see NVIDIA down by more than 12% right now.
Absolutely. And then you have global chip stocks also in the red across the board, ASML Holdings and others. There is the question, I will say, Alexander Wang made the point last week, and it's become sort of the question mark about all of this, which is, he suggested on our air that it is possible that they were using some of the highest performing NVIDIA chips, perhaps as many as 50,000 of them, to build this model. Now, and they weren't supposed to have those chips.
Right.
If that's true,
not the size.
The dynamic is different. If it's not true, then maybe all bets are off. It's possible, by the way, even if it is true, meaning even if they use those chips to create this, or at least partially to create this, it is still a significantly more efficient and better model. I think everybody agrees that right this moment, I mean, I don't know if did you get to play? It is mind-blowing.
It looks really great. I mean, it feels like it's open source, so people can test this out themselves.
But I can tell you, all the tests that I do just to see whether I think the writing is better, whether I think that it can answer certain questions. I mean, it was not only faster, it was more human. The reasoning is shocking. I mean, there were moments where I was like, oh my God, we are so much. You could feel the step change as a person. I will also say, as exciting as it was, there was an element where I became scared because I thought, I had the opportunity to talk to all these people last week, and they all said the future is here, and and then you sort of see it, and you go, oh, okay, I feel you in a different sort of visceral way. So yes, I think this is all happening at a level that when you mark your sort of AI history timeline in life, I think this past week, today, and everything else will be on it.
I think Mark Andreessen put it really succinctly and really smartly when he said that this feels like the Sputnik moment for the AI race, where China is really stepping in. So not just what it can do, but what it means for American dominance in AI, what it means for the Chinese being able to step in, and to have the Chinese actually open sourcing it, meaning that is going to be what goes around the world, and to have the cost factors that go into this. Huge step up and change, and puts us a little bit on our back foot in trying to figure out what this means. Well, I actually wonder, Satya Nadella, would he tell you again today that he's still good for the $80 billion?
I think they still are good for the $80 billion. I think actually I think the processing power issue is there's an element of which you're going to still have to have the current sort of efforts underway. I think the question longer term, I think it's a longer term question.
Can you recoup your investment? I mean, can you recoup your investment if that's the case?
Well, I think this is the big issue. And I think
who's going to pay for it if they get it?
At one point, and I don't know if we talked about it on Squawk or it might have been on Worldwide Exchange, one of the things that I was hearing that was fascinating out there is there were so many CEOs who were saying, you know what, I'm using OpenAI and I'm playing around with Anthropic to figure out what I need to do. And then, which is expensive for us, and we don't really love that. So we're playing around with what we need, and then we're trying to figure out how much of it we can replicate using Llama, which is the Meta version of it, but it's open source and effectively, therefore, free.
Well, and you can have some control over it too, as being open source. You can do things that you end up this way. You're not so beholden to OpenAI.
But to me, that's the issue. So here we have a situation where if people are already starting to move towards open source models, and I don't think that have been talked about publicly, really.
Right.
That's a whole kind of paradigm change.
Just back to the question on Microsoft. Microsoft shares down 6.8% this morning. Is there a point where Satya says, okay, maybe I'm not good for the 80 billion?
I don't know. I think he's still going to need this technology over the next 5 years. The question is, can he go, is he going to start using DeepSeek? By the way, there's a separate question, which is, if we think we have a problem with TikTok.
Oh, I thought this instantaneously.
Right. If we think we have a problem with TikTok, do we have a problem with this? Now, interestingly, this is an open source model.
You can take it and do your own stuff with it.
You can put it on your own
So they're not
computers.
owning your, unless there's something in it that we don't understand.
Right. They talk about Project Texas with.
But I thought the same thing. TikTok looks like poser's play compared to what this could potentially be. Although this is OpenAI, so you can take it and source it yourself and figure something out from it. So you're not storing it on their servers.
Anyway, it's fascinating. I think I don't know. We should call Satya, get him back, because the truth is, he does need some form of AI, for his Copilot and all of his other software.
Sure. But does it have to be?
Does it have to be OpenAI?
And is there a way to do it more cheaply and not have to spend $80 billion?
I think the question is probably that over time they're going to have to spend less money. I don't know if you saw, he put out a tweet just overnight called I didn't know about this. It's called the Jevons Paradox, and he links to a Wikipedia page, which I'll read to everybody if you'd like. In economics, the Jevons paradox, sometimes referred to as the Jevons effect, occurs when technological progress increases the efficiency with which a resource is used, reducing the amount of necessary for any one use, but the falling cost of use induces increased demand, enough that resources used is increased rather than reduced.
Could be, but does he still need to spend $80 billion to get to the same place? Could he spend $50 billion and still get the same out of it if you can find ways to do this more cheaply, if the architecture structure is such that you can actually get more efficient with all of these things, maybe he doesn't have to spend the $80 billion to get to that point.
I think he may still need to, just because of the abundance of how much processing power. Look, the guys who are, this DeepSeek, for the most part, people are now running on their own laptops and doing all sorts of things, so their computers are not overwhelmed. But if you decided you were doing this in the cloud, or there was going to be a cloud-based version of it, you'd still need a lot of processing power. I will say, just on top of his tweet, and this was just 5 hours ago, he says, the Jevons paradox strikes again. As AI gets more efficient and accessible, we will see its use skyrocket, turning it into a commodity.
Correct.
We just can't get enough of, though. And so they just can't get enough of piece of it may be the thing that hopefully helps them longer term, but still, I think it's a big question.
Right, and if you're doing it so that consumers are basically doing this for free, it's just who's paying the way on this? Are companies going to pay? Are they going to find cheaper ways to run some of this stuff themselves too?
Right. President Trump announcing a new joint venture yesterday called Stargate to build and grow AI infrastructure in the U.S. OpenAI, SoftBank, and Oracle planning to commit $100 billion.
China's latest AI breakthrough has leapfrogged the world.
I think we should take the development out of China very, very seriously.
A game-changing move that does not come from OpenAI, Google, or Meta.
There is a new model that has all of the valley buzzing.
But from a Chinese lab called DeepSeek.
It's opened a lot of eyes of what is actually happening in AI in China.
What took Google and OpenAI years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build, DeepSeek says took it just 2 months and less than $6 million.
They have the best open source model, and all the American developers are building on that.
I'm Deirdre Bosa with the Tech Check Take, China's AI breakthrough. It was a technological leap that shocked Silicon Valley. A newly unveiled, free, open source AI model that beat some of the most powerful ones on the market. But it wasn't a new launch from OpenAI or model announcement from Anthropic. This one was built in the East by a Chinese research lab called DeepSeek. And the details behind its development stunned top AI researchers here in the US. First, the cost. The AI lab reportedly spent just $5.6 million to build DeepSeek version 3. Compare that to OpenAI, which is spending $5 billion a year. And Google, which expects capital expenditures in 2024 to soar to over $50 billion. And then there's Microsoft that shelled out more than $13 billion just to invest in OpenAI. But even more stunning, how DeepSeek's scrappier model was able to outperform the lavishly funded American ones.
To see the DeepSeek new model, it's super impressive in terms of both how they have really effectively done an open source model that does what is this inference time compute, and it's super compute efficient.
It beat Meta's Llama, OpenAI's GPT-4o, and Anthropic's Claude Sonnet 3.5 on accuracy on wide-ranging tests, a subset of 500 math problems, an AI math evaluation, coding competitions, and a test of spotting and fixing bugs in code. Quickly following that up with a new reasoning model called R1, which just as easily outperformed OpenAI's cutting-edge O1 in some of those third-party tests.
Today, we released Humanity's Last Exam, which is a new evaluation or benchmark of AI models that we produced by getting, math, physics, biology, chemistry professors to provide the hardest questions they could possibly imagine. DeepSeek, which is the leading Chinese AI lab, their model is actually the top performing or roughly on par with the best American models.
They accomplished all that despite the strict semiconductor restrictions that the US government has imposed on China, which has essentially shackled them out of computing power. Washington has drawn a hard line against China in the AI race, cutting the country off from receiving America's most powerful chips like NVIDIA's H100 GPUs. Those were once thought to be essential to building a competitive AI model, with startups and big tech firms alike scrambling to get their hands on any available. But DeepSeek turned that on its head, sidestepping the rules by using NVIDIA's less performant H800s to build the latest model and showing that the chip export controls were not the chokehold DC intended.
They were able to take whatever hardware they were trained on, but use it way more efficiently.
But just who's behind DeepSeek anyway? Despite its breakthrough, very, very little is known about its lab and its founder, Liang Wenfeng. According to Chinese media reports, DeepSeek was born out of a Chinese hedge fund called High Flyer Quant that manages about $8 billion in assets. The mission on its developer site, it reads simply, unravel the mystery of AGI with curiosity. Answer the essential question with long-termism. The leading American AI startups, meanwhile, OpenAI and Anthropic, they have detailed charters and constitutions that lay out their principles and their founding missions, lengthy sections on AI safety and responsibility. Despite several attempts to reach someone at DeepSeek, we never got a response.
How did they actually assemble this talent? How did they assemble all the hardware? How did they assemble the data to do all this? We don't know. And it's never been publicized, and hopefully we can learn that.
But the mystery brings into sharp relief just how urgent and complex the AI face-off against China has become. Because it's not just DeepSeek. Other more well-known Chinese AI models have carved out positions in the race with limited resources as well. Kai-Fu Lee, he's one of the leading AI researchers in China, formerly leading Google's operations there. Now his startup, 01.ai, it's attracting attention, becoming a unicorn just 8 months after founding and bringing in almost $14 million in revenue in 2024.
The thing that shocks my friends in the Silicon Valley is not just our performance, but that we trained the model with only $3 million. And GPT-4 was trained by 80 to 100 million.
Trained with just $3 million. Alibaba's QN, meanwhile, cut costs by as much as 85% on its large language models in a bid to attract more developers and signaling that the race is on. China's breakthrough undermines the lead that our AI labs were once thought to have. In early 2024, former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, he predicted China was 2 to 3 years behind the US in AI. But now Schmidt is singing a different tune. Here he is on ABC's This Week.
I used to think we were a couple of years ahead of China, but China has caught up in the last 6 months in a way that is remarkable. The fact of the matter is that a couple of the Chinese programs, one, for example, is called DeepSeek, looks like they've caught up.
It raises major questions about just how wide OpenAI's moat really is. Back when OpenAI released ChatGPT to the world in November of 2022, it was unprecedented and uncontested. Now the company faces not only the international competition from Chinese models, but fierce domestic competition from Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, and Meta's open source Llama model. And now the game has changed. The widespread availability of powerful open source models allows developers to skip the demanding, capital-intensive steps of building and training models themselves. Now they can build on top of existing models, making it significantly easier to jump to the frontier, that is the front of the race, with a smaller budget and a smaller team.
In the last 2 weeks, AI research teams have really opened their eyes and have become way more ambitious on what's possible with a lot less capital. So previously, to get to the frontier, you'd have to think about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment and perhaps $1 billion of investment. What DeepSeek has now done here in Silicon Valley is it's opened our eyes to what you can actually accomplish with 10, 15, 20, $30 million.
It also means any company like OpenAI that claims the frontier today could lose it tomorrow. That's how DeepSeek was able to catch up so quickly. It started building on the existing frontier of AI. Its approach focusing on iterating on existing technology rather than reinventing the wheel.
They can take a really good big model and use a process called distillation. And what distillation is basically you use a very large model to help your small model get smart at the thing that you want it to get smart at. And that's actually very cost efficient.
It closed the gap by using available data sets, applying innovative tweaks, and leveraging existing models. So much so that DeepSeek's model has run into an identity crisis. It's convinced that it's ChatGPT. When you ask it directly, what model are you? DeepSeek responds, I'm an AI language model created by OpenAI, specifically based on the GPT-4 architecture. Leading OpenAI CEO Sam Altman to post in a thinly veiled shot at DeepSeek just days after the model was released, it's relatively easy to copy something that you know works. It's extremely hard to do something new, risky, and difficult when you don't know if it will work. But that's not exactly what DeepSeek did. It emulated GPT by leveraging OpenAI's existing outputs and architecture principles while quietly introducing its own enhancements, really blurring the line between itself and ChatGPT. It all puts pressure on a closed source leader like OpenAI to justify its costlier model as more and potentially nimbler competitors emerge.
Everybody copies everybody in this field. You can say Google did the transformer first. It's not OpenAI, and OpenAI just copied it. Google built the first large language models. They didn't prioritize it, but OpenAI did it in a productized way. So you can say all this in many ways. It doesn't matter.
So if everyone is copying one another, it raises the question: is massive spend on individual LLMs even a good investment anymore? Now, no one has as much at stake as OpenAI. The startup raised over $6 billion in its last funding round alone. But the company has yet to turn a profit. And with its core business centered on building the models, it's much more exposed than companies like Google and Amazon, who have cloud and ad businesses bankrolling their spend. For OpenAI, reasoning will be key. A model that thinks before it generates a response, going beyond pattern recognition to analyze, draw logical conclusions, and solve really complex problems. For now, the startup's O1 reasoning model, it's still cutting edge, but for how long?
Researchers at Berkeley showed that they could build a reasoning model for $450 just last week. So you can actually create these models that do thinking for much, much less. You don't need those huge amounts to pre-train the model. So I think the game is shifting.
It means that staying on top may require as much creativity as capital. DeepSeek's breakthrough also comes at a very tricky time for the AI darling, just as OpenAI is moving to a for-profit model and facing unprecedented brain drain. Can it raise more money at ever higher valuations if the game is changing? As Chamath Palihapitiya puts it, let me say the quiet part out loud. AI model building is a money trap. These chip restrictions from the US government, they were intended to slow down the race, to keep American tech on American ground, to stay ahead in the race.
What we want to do is we want to keep it in this country. China is a competitor and others are competitors.
So instead, the restrictions might have been just what China needed.
Necessity is the mother of invention. Because they had to go figure out workarounds, they actually ended up building something a lot more efficient.
It's really remarkable the amount of progress they've made with as little capital as it's taken them to make that progress.
It drove them to get creative with huge implications. DeepSeek is an open source model, meaning that developers have full access and they can customize its weights or fine-tune it to their liking.
It's known that once open source is caught up or improved over closed source software, all developers migrate to that.
But key is that it's also inexpensive. The lower the cost, the more attractive it is for developers to adopt.
The bottom line is our inference cost is 10 cents per million tokens. And that's 1/30th of what the typical comparable model charges. And where's it going? The 10 cents would lead to building apps for much lower costs. So if you wanted to build a U.com or Perplexity or some other app, you can either pay OpenAI $4.40 per million tokens, or if you have our model, it costs you just 10 cents.
It could mean that the prevailing model in global AI may be open source. As organizations and nations come around to the idea that collaboration and decentralization, those things can drive innovation faster and more efficiently than proprietary closed ecosystems. A cheaper, more efficient, widely adopted open source model from China, that could lead to a major shift in dynamics.
That's more dangerous because then they get to own the mind share, the ecosystem.
In other words, the adoption of a Chinese open source model at scale, that could undermine US leadership while embedding China more deeply into the fabric of global tech infrastructure.
There's always like a point where open source can stop being open source too, right? So the licenses are very favorable today, but if
could close it.
Exactly, if over time, they can always change the license. So it's important that we actually have people here in America building, and that's why Meta is so important.
Another consequence of China's AI breakthrough is giving its Communist Party control of the narrative. AI models built in China, they're forced to adhere to a certain set of rules set by the state. They must embody core socialist values. Studies have shown that models created by Tencent and Alibaba, they will censor historical events like Tiananmen Square, deny human rights abuse, and filter criticism of Chinese political leaders.
That contest is about whether we're going to have democratic AI informed by democratic values built to serve democratic purposes, or we're going to end up with autocratic AI.
If developers really begin to adopt these models en masse because they're more efficient, that could have a serious ripple effect, trickle down to even consumer-facing AI applications, and influence how trustworthy those AI-generated responses from chatbots really are.
There's really only two countries right now in the world that can build this at scale, and that is the US and China. And so, the consequences, the stakes in and around this are just enormous.
Enormous stakes, enormous consequences, and hanging in the balance, America's lead. For a topic so complex and new, we turn to an expert who's actually building in the space and model agnostic. Perplexity co-founder and CEO Arvind Srinivas, who you heard from throughout our piece, he sat down with me for more than 30 minutes to discuss DeepSeek and its implications, as well as Perplexity's roadmap. We think it's worth listening to that whole conversation, so here it is. So first, I want to know what the stakes are. Describe the AI race between China and the US and what's at stake.
Okay, so first of all, China has a lot of disadvantages in competing with the US. Number one is the fact that they don't get access to all the hardware that we have access to here. So they're kind of working with lower end GPUs than us. It's almost like working with the previous generation GPUs scrappily. And the fact that the bigger models tend to be more smarter naturally puts them at disadvantage. But the flip side of this is that necessity is the mother of invention. Because they had to go figure out workarounds, they actually ended up building something a lot more efficient. It's like saying, hey, look, you guys really got to get a top-notch model, and I'm not going to give you resources, and like figure out something, right? Unless it's impossible, unless it's mathematically possible to prove that it's impossible to do so, you can always try to like come up with something more efficient. But that is likely to make them come up with a more efficient solution than America. And of course, they have open sourced it, so we can still adopt something like that here. But that kind of talent they're building to do that will become an edge for them over time, right? The leading open source model in America is Meta's Llama family. It's really good. It's kind of like a model that you can run on a computer. But even though it got pretty close to GPT-4 and Sonnet at the time of its release, the model that was closest in quality was the giant 405B, not the 70B that you could run on your computer. And so there was still not a small, cheap, fast, efficient open source model that rivaled the most powerful closed models from OpenAI and Anthropic. Nothing from America, nothing from Mistral AI either. And then these guys come out with like a crazy model that's like 10x cheaper in AI pricing than GPT-4o and 15x cheaper than Sonnet, I believe. Really fast, 60 tokens per second, and pretty much equal or better in some benchmarks and worse in some others, but like roughly in that ballpark of 4O's quality. And they did it all with like approximately just 2048 H800 GPUs, which is actually equivalent to like somewhere around 1500 or 1000, 1500 H100 GPUs. That's like 20 to 30x lower than the amount of GPUs that GPT-4 is usually trained on. They roughly $5 million in total compute budget. They did it with so little money and such an amazing model, gave it away for free, wrote a technical paper, and definitely it makes us all question like, okay, like if we have the equivalent of Doge for like model training, this is an example of that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Efficiency is what you're getting at. So fraction of the price, fraction of the time,
Yeah.
dumbed down GPUs, essentially. What was your surprise when you understood what they had done?
So my surprise was that when I actually went through the technical paper, the amount of clever solutions they came up with, first of all, they train a mixture of experts model. It's not that easy to train. There's a lot of like, the main reason people find it difficult to catch up with OpenAI, especially in the MOE architecture, is that there's a lot of irregular loss spikes. The numerics are not stable. So often like you got to restart the training checkpoint again, and a lot of infrastructure needs to be built for that. And they came up with very clever solutions to balance that without adding additional hacks. And they also figured out floating point 8-bit training, at least for some of the numerics. And they cleverly figured out which has to be in higher precision, which has to be in lower precision. To my knowledge, I think floating point 8 training is not that well understood. I think most of the training in America is still running in FP16, maybe OpenAI, and some people are trying to explore that, but it's pretty difficult to get it right. So because necessity, some of them mentioned, because they don't have that much memory, that many GPUs, they figured out a lot of numerical stability stuff that makes their training work. And they claimed in the paper that for majority of the training was stable, which means what? They can always rerun those training runs again and on more data or better data. And then it only trained for 60 days. So it's pretty amazing.
Safe to say you were surprised.
So I was definitely surprised. Usually the wisdom, or like, I wouldn't say wisdom, the myth is that Chinese are just good at copying. So if we stop writing research papers in America, if we stop describing the details of our infrastructure or architecture and stop open sourcing, they're not going to be able to catch up. But the reality is some of the details in DeepSeek V3 are so good that I wouldn't be surprised if Meta took a look at it and incorporated some of that in
Tried
Llama
to copy
4.
them.
Right? I wouldn't necessarily say copy. It's all like, sharing science, engineering. But the point is like, it's changing. Like, it's not like China is copycat. They're also innovating.
We don't know exactly the data that it was trained on, right? Even though it's open source. We know some of the ways and things that it was trained on, but not everything.
Correct.
And there's this idea that it was trained on public ChatGPT outputs, which would mean it just was copied, but you're saying it goes beyond that. There's real innovation in that.
Yeah, look, I mean, they've trained it on 14.8 trillion tokens. The internet has so much ChatGPT. If you actually go to any LinkedIn post or X post now, most of the comments are written by AI. You can just see it. Like, people are just trying to write. In fact, even within X, there's like a Grok tweet enhancer, or in LinkedIn, there's an AI enhancer. Or in Google Docs and Word, there are AI tools to like rewrite your stuff. So if you do something there and copy paste it somewhere on the internet, it's naturally going to have some elements of a ChatGPT like training, right? And there's a lot of people who don't even bother to strip away that I'm a language model part. So they just paste it somewhere, and like, it's very difficult to control for this. I think XAI has spoken about this too. So I wouldn't like disregard their technical accomplishment just because like for some prompts, like who are you, or like which model are you, it responds like that. It doesn't even matter in my opinion.
First time on the show, Scale AI founder and CEO Alexander Wang. His company provides accurately labeled data to help companies train their AI tools. And back in 2022, he became the youngest self-made billionaire in the world. Pretty amazing.
Thanks for having me on.
I want to go straight to what we were just talking about off camera, which is the idea of where the U.S. is on AI versus China, because you have some very surprising statistics that I think will probably, frankly, freak out some of the viewers.
So yeah, first of all, the AI race and the AI war between US and China, I think, is one of the most important issues of today. We took out a full-page ad on the Washington Post on Tuesday saying that, you know, America must win the AI war. And so this sort of relative race in AI between the US and China is critical. Today, we released Humanity's Last Exam, which is a new evaluation or benchmark of AI models that we produced by getting, you know, math, physics, biology, chemistry professors to provide the hardest questions they could possibly imagine that are relevant to their recent research to really put the test to the models. To give you a sense, no model is getting above 10% on this test. That being said, you know, what we found is that DeepSeek, which is the leading Chinese AI lab, their model is actually the top performing, or roughly on par with the best American models, which are O1 from
Okay, so
OpenAI.
I think we have been all under the impression that the U.S. was way ahead of China as it relates to AI, in large part because we have access to, you know, NVIDIA GPUs and chips and other things that supposedly the Chinese do not have. I keep hearing from people all week, from people, Chinese AI executives, that they say, well, we're so close. And by the way, we're doing it with one hand tied behind our back. Our algos are better. We're actually going to figure out how to do this, do it better than the US, and in even a more energy efficient way, because we don't need these super powerful chips. Are they happen to be right?
There's two things happening. First, it is true. It has been true for a long time that the United States has been ahead. And that's been true for, you know, maybe the past decade. That being said, you know, the very recent event on Christmas Day, you know, about a month ago, DeepSeek released a model, which, by the way, I think is symbolic that the Chinese lab releases, you know, an earth-shattering model on Christmas Day when, you know, the rest of us are sort of celebrating the holiday. And they released it to much fanfare, and then they followed up with their reasoning model, DeepSeek R1, which is the one that we evaluated as top of the leaderboard. You know, the reality is yes and no. So, you know, the Chinese labs, they have more H100s than people think. You know,
and these are the highest powered NVIDIA chips that they were not supposed to have.
Yes. My understanding is that DeepSeek has about 50,000 H100s, which they can't talk about, obviously, because it is against the export controls that the United States has put in place. And I think it is true that, you know, I think they have more chips than other people expect, but also on a go-forward basis, they are going to be limited by the chip controls and the export controls that we have in place.
How do you, I mean, you work with everybody, so I don't know if it's fair or unfair, but how do you stack rank these large language models and who ultimately is going to be a winner? Or are they all so close and it gets commoditized?
The interesting thing that we see right now, so we actually specialize in this. We've produced our SEAL evaluations, our safety evaluations and alignment labs, evaluations which measure across many different dimensions. We measure across math capabilities, coding capabilities, multilingual capabilities, and reasoning capabilities, and many different dimensions, including tool use and agent capabilities. And what we see is different models are better at different things. So it's hard to put a clear stack ranking among all the models. For example, the OpenAI models are extremely good at reasoning, but the Anthropic models might be really good at code. And sort of there's a diversity of capabilities of the models. That being said, I think what we're seeing in general is the space is becoming more competitive, not less competitive.
I keep hearing from business leaders here that they're all playing around with, OpenAI, or they're playing around with Claude, which is the Anthropic model, or they're playing around with Gemini, et cetera. And then they're going and using Llama. They're going to find some open source version to try to get close to what they could approximate these other guys doing because of just the different price points of these things. Do you think that's the future of this? I think like in a Linux world.
There's definitely a dimension. It comes down to ultimately the level of capabilities and intelligence that are required for your use case. I think ultimately what we're going to see is, what we do with all the leading labs, including OpenAI and Google DeepMind and Meta and many others, is continuing to push the frontier and push the boundaries. And so how do we leverage data, given that as an industry, we've sort of run out of publicly available data? How do we generate new data to keep pushing the frontiers? And our belief is that, advanced capabilities are going to enable incredible use cases where you're going to be willing to pay for those increased capabilities. But for the more simplistic use cases, those will probably go more towards open source or more basic models.
We've been talking all morning about Stargate and the debate happening on Twitter between Sam Altman and Elon Musk about whether they really have $100 billion or $500 billion. Satya Nadella was sitting in your chair just yesterday saying he's got $80 billion, his money's real. He took to Twitter. What do you make of all this? You know all these players.
So much is on Twitter anyway. So I'm not sure.
Or X, we should say.
Or X. But I think one thing that is very real, regardless of sort of Stargate specifically as a program, is that the United States is going to need a huge amount of computational capacity and a huge amount of infrastructure. So this was actually we wrote a letter to the Trump administration on recommendations on how to ensure that the U.S. stays ahead. And one of them was really around infrastructure. We need to unleash U.S. energy to enable this AI boom. And that's clearly what we're seeing right now, which is, in addition to the Stargate program, many of the major AI companies and major clouds are going to be looking to build giant data centers. So
the reason I asked this about the different companies doing this, do you ultimately think we need 5, 6, 7 companies all trying to build frontier models? Or, there's been a talk forever that, in a different, if Lena Khan hadn't been running the FTC, would have Amazon wanted to buy Anthropic already, for example? Or would have Microsoft bought OpenAI? Or would have some of these folks, so there wouldn't be as many, everybody competing against each other in the same way? I don't know, maybe you think the competition's great. I just don't know how long term, how many models there ultimately will be like that.
Our view is actually that this is potentially going to be one of the greatest markets or the greatest industries ever. Right now, let's say there's between 10 and $20 billion of LLM-based revenue. And if you believe that we're actually on a track towards superintelligence or AGI, then it stands to reason that that's going to go to $1 trillion or more of revenue. And so if you're looking at a market that's going to go from, let's say, 10 billion to 1 trillion over who knows how many years, I tend to believe a fewer number of years. I think we're sort of in the 2 to 4 range.
2 to 4 to get to AGI. And what's your version of AGI?
I think, obviously there's many definitions. The definition I believe in are powerful AI systems that are able to use a computer just like you or I could, and could use all the tools that a computer could, and could basically.
I want to start with you, Josh, and I'm going to hear from you and Bryn first, because you're our longest owners of NVIDIA. And I'm wondering what you make of today's sell-off, how you're putting it into context, the kinds of questions you want answered, and what all of this means to you.
I think there's a component of today's sell-off where people are very reasonably recalibrating their expectations for how big the total addressable market for new GPU sales is. But then I think there's an even bigger component that's just speculators being unwound. This is the most over-owned stock in the market, and for good reason. People have absolutely gone crazy with options trading here, with leverage. We've got vehicles that are 2x NVIDIA. We've got all kinds of zero data expiration, weekly options. It's an absolute casino that's been built on the back of a legitimately amazing growth story. And so I think if you didn't have that circus in town, you'd probably see the stock down 5 to 10%. But because you have all that leverage, you're seeing much more. I think there are two very important things that people need to know about what's happening with DeepSeek AI and the way it's being interpreted on Wall Street. The first is, it doesn't matter if it's a Chinese government psyop or not. The technological innovation of having an LLM train itself through reinforcement learning is impressive. The cost efficiency of doing inference with only 7 billion parameters rather than 700 billion parameters is impressive. The possibility of being able to do more model training and inferencing with less usage of power and less chips is impressive. It doesn't mean, though, that chip demand is at risk. What I think it means is you're more likely to see an acceleration of AI everywhere, all over the economy. And I think that that's kind of becoming the default version of what's to happen here. The idea of LLMs becoming commoditized, Scott, has always been on the table. That's why Zuckerberg released Llama 2 the way that they did. We've seen this in previous technological revolutions. In the cloud, for example, Google gave us docs, sheets, and slides, which commoditized Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. But everywhere in the world you go, you will still see people using Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. I don't think there's a line of Fortune 500 CTOs who are dying to take a fistful of Chinese AI technology and shove it right into their cloud data. It's unfathomable. So I think this is a little bit overdone. And then the second thing I would tell you here, maybe the more important thing, most of this conversation about the impact of DeepSeek is happening on Twitter. If you know anything about Twitter, X, if you know anything about X, you know it's loaded with hedge fund managers and asset managers who absolutely loathe the Mag 7. They've been waiting for this moment for 2 years. These stocks, NVIDIA in particular, have been making them look bad for 24 straight months, and they're dying for this moment where small caps are up, Europe is flat, value stocks are outperforming growth, and they view this as comeuppance for the people who have been riding these giant tech stocks to huge gains. And I think because there's that desire to see these investors get beaten up a little bit, maybe that's why some of the rhetoric about this being the end of NVIDIA is getting so overdone. I think there's some wish casting happening here from some of the pseudonymous hedge fund managers.
Bryn, I mean, I think one of the most important words that Josh used in that answer was if, because there are a lot of ifs and there are a lot of unknowns, whether this is all, even possible or not. Stacey Raskin at Bernstein, who, by the way, is going to be on with me today on Closing Bell, says, we believe that the DeepSeek did not build OpenAI for $5 million. They say the panic he does. He says the panic over the weekend seems overblown. Kenner Fitzgerald today says this is actually very bullish for compute and for NVIDIA, almost certainly leading to an AI industry wanting more compute, not less. They'd be buyers of shares on weakness like you're seeing today, which is the worst day for this stock since March of 2020. Do you agree with that?
Do I agree to buy more shares today? I'm not sure. Let's see it flesh out. But where I do agree with Stacey, and I think that as an investors, this is what a good old-fashioned unknown looks like. It comes out of nowhere. No one's prepared for it. And this is what you see: NVIDIA down 17, Vistria down 30. But what I do know, if you read the technical paper, it says apparently in the technical paper that the $6 million does not include costs associated with prior research on architectural algorithms, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that you have this, what I would call a fast follower, that took all of the success of ChatGPT, OpenAI, et cetera, really smart folks. The smart folks are not stuck in the US, they're all over the world. And they've done something incredibly innovative. And so I think that the overreaction is this like $6 million number, and to think that they did this out of nowhere when the paper actually says that cost does not include these other items, which we don't know. And so I think as an investor, you have to like understand your positioning, understand, to Josh's point about the large language models, you know, I'm a big fan of Alex Karp. I'm sure he's kind of laughing today at Palantir because he's been saying forever, LLMs are the commodity. It's what you build on top of that is what's going to create the return. And so if Masa and Larry Ellison and Sam Altman are building all these data centers to go just infer for OpenAI, I think you call that into question. But if firms like Microsoft, Amazon, et cetera, are building these to create, and Tesla, robotics and actually applications for us to use, then I think the story is very much intact. But for right now, since we are in this unknown situation that we came into the weekend, I think you have to take a step back, kind of see how it fleshes out. But I absolutely don't believe that this is the beginning of the end of NVIDIA.
Yeah, Weiss, you own the stock. I mean, we have the luxury of everybody owning the stock today. Mark Andreessen tweets that DeepSeek R1 is AI's Sputnik moment. Yeah. For those who are, wondering what all of this means, and as I said, there's a lot of ifs. Like, we don't really know what all of this is really about, what's true, what's not true, the cost of this versus the cost of that. What do you think about your position for those who have large positions in NVIDIA today, who loaded up over the course of the last 18 months because they feel like that's the epicenter of the AI revolution story? What do you do?
Well, unfortunately, and fortunately today, but it's only today, NVIDIA is not a large position for me, as I've been saying. And
is for some. Many.
It is for some.
It's for many.
And what I would say is that the reason it wasn't a large position is because necessity is the mother of invention. So I don't recall any time in history of technology that I'm aware of where a company, and I've said this repeatedly, where a company like NVIDIA has been able to hold their technological edge. So I don't know what to do about NVIDIA now. To Bryn's point, there's so much we don't know. This is the knee-jerk reaction, largely driven by the market that we're in, meaning that ETFs are 50% of it, lots of leverage. But here's what I do know. If this is the future, in other words, lower costs, then I will tell you that Google, that Microsoft, that Meta should be up today because their costs of building out new capabilities has just come down meaningfully. So it's puzzling to me. Now, Meta's up, maybe because of that, but all those CapEx budgets that analysts had a problem with, well, if this is true, it's going to take a long time to flesh this out. Well, then that's very positive for them. In terms of the NVIDIA, in terms of the Vertivs, in terms of all the others.
Which are all down. I mean, Vertiv's down like 27%. Yeah. A lot of the power providers to the AI story are getting hammered today.
Right.
It is certainly not limited to either NVIDIA or the hyperscalers themselves.
Right. So in order for those stocks to be down as much as they are, you have to believe that AI innovations are going to stop. Now, there's some technical nuances like will the fabs and will the data centers run as hot, particularly the data centers run as hot? Will they need as much cooling? Well, that remains to be seen. My suspicion is that the cost now of building them goes down so that you will still need as much power because we're so short power. You will still need as many cooling systems. So on a day like today, I'm not doing anything because I don't really understand what's real and what's not.
This new large language model has taken the tech world by absolute storm and represents a big breakthrough in the AI research community. Last Sunday, while TikTok was banned for 12 hours, an AI research team from China released a new large language model called DeepSeek R1. As you can see on the screen, DeepSeek R1's benchmark shows that it performs at a similar level to OpenAI's O1 model on reasoning problems like math, coding, and scientific reasoning. And in this video, I'll talk about the 3 main takeaways from their paper, including how they use chain of thought in order to have the model self-evaluate its performance, how it uses pure reinforcement learning to have the model guide itself, and how they use model distillation to make DeepSeek and other LLMs more accessible to everyone. Chain of thought is a very simple but effective prompt engineering technique where we pretty much ask the model to think out loud, where we add to our prompt we want the model to explain its reasoning step by step. That way, if the model makes any mistakes, we can easily pinpoint where in its reasoning it was off so that we can reprompt the model to not make the mistake again. Here's an example from the paper, where if you give the model a question like this math problem, you can see that in its response, it actually reasons through it and gives you the steps to how it got to the solution. It showed its work. You can see in red, it says, wait, there's an aha moment, as well as let's reevaluate this step by step. And in doing so, the model is going to have a more accurate response than if you were to just give the response by itself without chain of thought reasoning. The way DeepSeek uses reinforcement learning is a little different how most AI models are trained. We don't give it the question and answer, we kind of let it learn on its own. This is exactly the same way in how a baby learns how to walk for the first time. If you notice, if you've ever seen a baby, it's actually pretty funny. They stumble around the environment and they maybe hold on to things as they try to decide how to walk. And in doing so, they're learning how to move and position their joints so that they don't fall. And in the same way, reinforcement learning allows us to train a model by optimizing its policy, aka how the model behaves, and it does so to maximize the reward. And as it explores its environment over time, it learns which policies maximize the reward, and then it just probably picks the policy over here or the policy over here. For example, if you're solving an equation like this, there's 2 or 3 different ways to solve it, but one of them is much shorter than the other way to solve it, and thus has a much higher reward than the other. And reinforcement learning is exactly how most robots learn how to walk and how Tesla's self-driving car learns how to drive through a city. And if we go to the paper and look at this graph, we can see how DeepSeek R1 improves how accurately it can answer questions if we train it over time. Using reinforcement learning, instead of telling the model what a correct answer is to a question, since that kind of data is pretty expensive to obtain, we instead let it figure out on its own while measuring how accurate the model is. You can see while OpenAI's O1 model is static, DeepSeek R1 eventually outperforms OpenAI's O1 model. And if we let it train for even longer, it looks like it's going to perform even more and get closer to 90 or even 100% accuracy if we kept training it. And you can see how the model uses chain of thought reasoning in order to improve its responses over time and self-reflect. In reinforcement learning, we can't exactly tell the model how to change its policy. So that's why we use chain of thought reasoning to force the model to self-reflect and evaluate to change its behavior to get closer to a maximum reward. That way we can kind of give the model the right incentives using prompts, and the model can reevaluate how it answers questions, and it can do so with an increasing accuracy. And this equation is the key behind how DeepSeek uses reinforcement learning in order to optimize its policy. It uses group relative policy optimization in order to essentially use this equation to score how well it answered a question without having the correct answer. So this looks very, very complicated, and I'll just briefly explain the most important parts of it. What we do is we take pretty much the expectation of the old answers from the old.
Yeah, I mean, it's rocking the markets, it's rocking the AI community. So first, just kind of straighten this out. Give us your perspective. You're certainly an expert on this through your work at the Goldman School of Public Policy, also your work with Alphabet and Microsoft. When we're talking about this AI race between China and the US, what does DeepSeek represent? The thought was that the US had a significant lead, maybe, 4 months, 6 months. Has that changed in your mind with this development?
Oh, Absolutely. I mean, the world has long looked to the United States to be the leader in artificial intelligence, but these recent model releases from China have demonstrated its ability to leapfrog and catch up with US tech giants and achieve groundbreaking results without the luxury of advanced hardware, which is ultimately challenging everything that we thought was necessary for innovation in the AI space. See, what DeepSeek represents is that AI innovation isn't necessarily driven by the companies with the largest pockets or the fanciest hardware, but that collaborative development approaches can actually end up providing market-leading technologies. So this AI race truly isn't just about US versus China. It's about which approach to developing AI is more effective at creating innovation. Is it the private closed source development that we've been following with companies like Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic? Or is it open source development, which companies in America like Meta are taking that approach, which we've seen with DeepSeek? Another AI model coming out of China, which was also released around the same time as DeepSeek, is called K15. And what this model does is actually outperforms DeepSeek in many of its reasoning and mathematics benchmarks, and it offers unlimited free usage, which highlights that this collaborative development is not just a one-off success, but a new pattern that's going to shape the AI industry moving forward. And these US tech giants may need to adjust their strategy to keep up.
So, X, we just touched on it in the beginning, but I want to circle back to that. In your mind, is the U.S. still in the lead? Some people thought it was 6 months. I've heard some people say 4 months. Or is now just the idea of a lead, has that gone away in some sense, and now is it just more competitive?
I believe that it's more competitive because DeepSeek has open sourced its new innovative approaches to training AI models, which allowed them to achieve these remarkable results with less hardware. That means that these new approaches can be integrated by our AI tech giants. The question is, how quickly will they do so, and how will that impact the development of their products moving forward? Again, science, especially in technology and in AI development, is not a one-sided thing. It's a constant conversation, and China's voice has just gotten louder in the room.
Okay. We're going to talk a lot about valuations when it comes to AI-focused companies, specifically an OpenAI. Does this change the valuation in your mind of an OpenAI? The thought was before that they had a moat, but that moat was scale with their proprietary model. Does the idea of these open source models being so fast to get going, and if it's true, by the way, if it's true that it only costs $6 million to build, does that erase that moat? Does that diminish that moat that a lot of these US companies have?
I don't believe that it erases or diminishes the moat as much as it maybe puts a little bit of fear in investors' minds and maybe makes them a little bit nervous about, oh no, America was so far ahead, can they catch up? Now, here's the thing about OpenAI in particular. They have been heavily focused on reasoning models, but also they just released their new product operator, which allows it to control a device, which we've seen in things like Copilot. Advances that we have not seen be open sourced on the Chinese market with either DeepSeek or K1.5. And again, the advances that were brought out by both of these models can be incorporated in the current and future development techniques of American companies. And news reports around the internet this morning are showing that companies and leaders are looking at how to incorporate these innovations into their own unique proprietary technology. So if anything, I think that this will bolster the competition, make it more exciting, and we're going to see more new products developed as a result, not necessarily see OpenAI or Microsoft become irrelevant in their AI developments, but that they're going to be enhanced by this advancements.
X, we're almost out of time. I need a quick answer on this one, but I do want to ask you. You just said the word incorporate, not adopt, when we're talking about open source models. You worked at our US tech giants, Alphabet and Microsoft. Could we see a similar development happen at our US tech giants where they put out these open source models and try to take the same strategy that we've seen when it comes to DeepSeek?
I think that a lot of US companies already do put out open source models. They just aren't the topic of common conversation. Google has Gemma, for example. Amazon has different models. Meta has their own open models that they use as well. I think what we're going to see is a change in the training techniques that will allow us to accomplish more with less hardware. And given that we're already so far advanced and ahead with the amount and the type of hardware that we had, regaining that lead will be easy once we incorporate the more efficient development processes into our more advanced hardware.
All right, a look at U.S. futures, yes. In case you're just joining us right now and wondering why some of these contracts are down 2%, 1% on the S&P futures, yeah, well, you gotta blame is it the bandwagoning? Is that the verb there on the DeepSeek trade? So the opposite of this is obviously a lot of the related stocks in China are actually moving to the upside here, and might this give you something to think about as far as stretch valuations in the US? And is there an alternative, actually?
Yeah,
I think it's the question here.
Seeking deep meaning, going deep into this story, obviously. Investors are too, trying to figure this out. Is it a trend, or is this, a short-term trend, or is it something a little deeper, dare to say? All right, over the past few days, a Chinese AI company has been making waves in Silicon Valley, and my pen just dropped onto the floor.
I'll grab it for you. But yeah, go ahead, keep reading.
That's because AI models from DeepSeek have been scoring impressively on global benchmarks. The free open source large language model was unveiled in December. The lab behind it says it took 2 months and under $6 million to build. I think that's a key point right there. That's a fraction of what OpenAI and Google spent to train their models. Dave?
Yeah, $6 million.
How much has OpenAI and Meta and Google and Tesla spent combined?
Well, I know of more expensive apartments in Hong Kong than the budget it took to get this up. Last week, the founder of DeepSeek was the only AI leader selected to attend a meeting of entrepreneurs with Chinese Premier Li Qiang. And over the weekend, Xinhua published this editorial on how China's AI advances are working, despite Washington's tech curbs on the country. Robert Lee is with us, our Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst. So, you told us so.
Well, we've been writing on this company for the best part of 6 or 7 months. And I think for anybody who follows the China AI sector closely, as we do, the profile has been relatively high in this part of the world. But what you've seen over the last week or so, prompted by the coverage and, as you said, the meeting with the Premier, it's helped raise the company's profile both nationally and also externally. And this story's been picked up by a number of external news outlets. But, Bloomberg Intelligence, some lead, others follow. We've been, very active on this for, as I said, for quite some time.
It was the talk of the town in Davos, from what I understand. So what is the secret sauce, if you will? Is it the low cost, or do they have the processing power for the training and the deep learning?
Yeah, well, taking a step back with the export restrictions you saw on the NVIDIA chips, etc., has been a major challenge. There is clear evidence, I think, that the big tech platforms, the Alibabas and Tencents of this world, both preemptively accumulated inventory of chips beforehand and have maybe, gained a helping hand from their friends in other parts of the world to gain access to these chips. But then for smaller companies such as DeepSeek, although they still have access to a sufficient number of chips, this challenge has prompted them to become more innovative. And so the way in which they develop the models is a far more computationally effective and therefore requires less chips and allows them to undercut their rivals cost-wise or price-wise significantly. So without going into the technical detail on DeepSeek, it's something called a mixture of experts. It's the architecture they use. One of the first in the industry to do this. They've really managed to forge ahead. And as you mentioned in your preview, are ranked top 10 in terms of global large language models. So I think, again, this just highlights and illustrates the point that whilst Chinese tech companies faced, problems on the semiconductor and chip side, they have a very strong track record in terms of innovation and software. Alibaba, Tencent are two of the world's leading tech platforms. And that, in numerical terms, China has more software developers than the US by a ratio of approximately 3 to 1.
And what does this mean for US AI in particular?
Again, I think, the Microsofts, et cetera, of this world were undoubtedly aware of DeepSeek, but, it's the headlines that have probably prompted them to have a little bit of a rethink and think how they can compete on this. I think one consistent point we've made over the last 18 months or so is that the technical barriers to entry on software are not as high compared to something like semiconductors. So I think there's already evidence that some of the US companies are moving to this mixture of experts architecture, and I would expect the rest of them to follow. So perhaps that could mean that DeepSeek's progress is forestalled to some degree, but I still see it as, one of the leading large language model developers out there globally. But again, it just shows.
Let's dive in here to the real significance of China's, quote, low-cost AI model, this DeepSeek R1. Is the sell-off across those names he mentioned deserved? Raymond James Tavis McCord is here. hack and how DeepSeek got over the story before everyone else. Welcome to all of you. Bradley, I just thought it was interesting what you said about people using this model. By the way, I tried finally to download it this morning and couldn't. Maybe that's because of the hack. But what's your experience been, and what do you think, the take-up ultimately will be here in the U.S. of this Chinese offering?
Yeah, I mean, look, as an early stage venture investor, there's no such thing as investing in a company that isn't either an AI company or using AI in some way, or at least has an extremely good reason if they're not. But if they're using AI in some way, then the cost obviously becomes very material and really important.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved the soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. There's one story today. China catches up on AI. We've got a terrific set of guests for you. We'll get to Mandeep Singh in moments. Paul, you were deep into DeepSeek before last night at 6 p.m.
Exactly right. And so what I did is I went back to Bloomberg Intelligence, and we've got a technology analyst in Hong Kong, Robert Lee.
One Chinese startup just launched a new AI model to rival OpenAI, and it is called DeepSeek. It's raising questions about U.S. dominance in artificial intelligence. Madison Allwood's been looking at this. First of all, what exactly does DeepSeek do?
Yeah, absolutely, Stu. So it's an AI model and has a corresponding chatbot like ChatGPT of OpenAI, and it has significantly narrowed the gap between the U.S. and China when it comes to artificial intelligence. DeepSeek is the brainchild of a small group of researchers working for a Chinese hedge fund manager that have been able to produce technology that is on par with OpenAI and Google, even though those companies are sinking billions of dollars and years into development. Meanwhile, DeepSeek did it for cheaper in a couple of months with fewer chips. So on January 20th, DeepSeek introduced R1. This is an AI model that reasons, so it can do complex problem solving. It thinks through the problem, essentially. Silicon Valley advisor to President Trump, Mark Andreessen, said, quote, DeepSeek R1 is one of the most amazing and impressive breakthroughs I've ever seen. It's also open source. DeepSeek said training one of its latest models costs just $5.6 million. Compare that to the $100 million that Anthropic used last year. As a result, tech stocks dipping today. You see them all in the red there. DeepSeek's AI model has raised serious questions about American dominance in the space. It has rattled chip stocks because DeepSeek claims to have used just around 2,000 NVIDIA chips to train its V3 model. Compare that to the tens of thousands of chips used for U.S. models. But there are also questions around whether China is underreporting how much money and how much computing power they're using. Skepticism from Elon Musk as well. He says that there's no way they're able to do it with this amount of chips. DeepSeek's latest flagship model, V3, also won't answer political questions about China or Xi Jinping. And this is likely a similar setup to TikTok, right, when we talk about that issue. The concern there is that information used is sent to their servers in China. But this is an important distinction I want to get to. Because DeepSeek is open source, essentially it means that developers in the US can use the code and programming locally on their computers if they have enough computing power. So that means that you can run it here without this concern of American data being sent to China. So the biggest concern is the eroding American share of the AI market. We are unseating US dominance in the space. And I think we saw quickly a full screen. It's risen in the charts in terms of U.S. use, so much so that people are having issues accessing DeepSeek today because of how many downloads it has.
It's like a pivotal moment, isn't it?
Incredibly, there you have it. Incredibly pivotal. We are so far ahead of China before this news that we were just miles, and now we're not. And then there's, as you've been mentioning throughout the morning, the concerns around how much money does this actually take? Yep. Because we've been investing so much money, infrastructure, power, and China, DeepSeek, is claiming that they've really slashed that. So how does that work?
It's fascinating. I don't know how it works. I really don't know how it works. Good stuff, though.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
Have we achieved a soft landing? Has the Fed kind of done its job?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Fears over a broader regional war in the Middle East.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Opening Bid. I'm Yahoo Finance Executive Editor Brian Sozzi. Like I always say, this is a podcast that will make you a better investor and, yes, a better leader. Before we get to our featured guest for today, I have to start off with a stock of the day. Returning favorite for Opening Bid fans out there, that is NVIDIA. You're seeing markets being absolutely eviscerated on news from a company most people have never even heard of. It's not deepfake, it's DeepSeek. DeepSeek, company out of China, really touting its latest AI model. And the fears are this company reportedly, of course, you always have to question a lot of news coming out of China, reportedly has created a model more powerful than OpenAI and Meta's Llama model using less chips or less high-powered chips. So the fears on the street is that a lot of this AI spending will be dialed back. That will, of course, impact or potentially impact the likes of NVIDIA. I would just caution folks like this. You're seeing NVIDIA potentially heading toward its worst day ever in terms of losing market cap. Stock's down about 10% pre-market as you're listening to this. It's not like Meta and a lot of these other companies are going to change their capital expenditure plans today because of some company many don't even know. So you have to question news like this. And that's why you could probably end up seeing investors come into NVIDIA after this very steep sell-off because the next 4 quarters for NVIDIA, by all indications, are going to be absolutely mind-blowing. Now, where it could impact NVIDIA and a lot of their chip players is the outlook for 2026. Does AI spending continue to ramp in 2026 if companies are able to use less computing power or use less chips to create even more high-power models? Something to watch there moving forward. I want to stay on this thread with our next guest here. Jason Thomas, Head of Global Research, Investment Strategy at Carlyle. Jason, good to see you. Your note and your research, very well timed because you dig into a lot of this. So I'll put this question to you. Should investors fear the news coming out of a DeepSeek?
Stock market's opened just a few minutes ago, and it's not pretty. Down big, especially the tech-heavy NASDAQ. CNN's Matt Egan is here to explain what we're seeing and why, Matt.
Yeah, John, we've got a bit of a tech sell-off this morning, and it's being caused by earth-shattering developments in the AI space. So let's take a look at this. Did you see the Dow down more than 140 points right now? The S&P solidly lower, but the real action is over here in the NASDAQ, 600 points lower, nearly 3%, on track for one of its worst days in the past 2 years. And here's why. There's a Chinese startup that few people had ever heard of until the past few days, and it has emerged as a real player in the AI arms race. It's called DeepSeek, and investors, and I would imagine officials in Washington, are stunned to learn that DeepSeek's AI model has developed technology that can actually be competitive with OpenAI and Google and XAI and all these more established players. It's only been around for a bit, but DeepSeek has already vaulted to the top of the App Store on Apple as the most downloaded app, passing ChatGPT, which is pretty shocking. Look at that, #1. Veteran investor, billionaire Mark Andreessen, he's a legendary tech investor. He said that DeepSeek is, quote, one of the most amazing and impressive breakthroughs that he has ever seen. Now, the most stunning thing here isn't necessarily that China has developed a pretty good AI app. It's how cheap it is. DeepSeek says that their AI model only cost $5.6 million. Now, we don't know that, but if that's true, that is pretty stunning. Anthropic, one of the leading AI companies, has said that it costs about $100 million to $1 billion to develop an AI model. We know that Mark Zuckerberg, the Meta CEO, says that his company plans to spend $65 billion on AI. So, John, look, this is all really questioning sort of the foundation here of the AI boom, which is that it requires a lot of spending, which is that the U.S. is running away with the AI arms race, and it's also questioning some of the big positives that had pushed markets to record highs.
A lot of people have put a lot of money into AI, and now they're wondering if that money is needed the way that some of these American companies have said it is.
Exactly.
We just don't know if the claims being made by these Chinese companies.
Yeah, this is moving so fast. It's stunning.
All right, we're going to stay on top of this. As we said, big drops, especially in the NASDAQ.
Speaking a lot more about DeepSeek, it's one of these big stocks that has really changed the game, it seems, in just a couple of days. Without warning, a big unknown Chinese firm rattling the U.S. market. Shelley Palmer is CEO of the Palmer Group and a professor of advanced media. He joins me now from New York. Shelley, great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
It seems like there's a bit of a coup happening in the AI space. Tell me about DeepSeek, what you know about it. I mean, it's a startup. It's 1-year-old company. A lot of people are downloading it. And the question is it taking on the big guys in the United States?
So DeepSeek is a company out of China. It is a startup. As you said, it's about a year old. They have a model called DeepSeek V3, and in the last little bit, they released R1, which is a reasoning engine, and it's open source on an MIT license. You can download it. The magic here is that instead of taking months to train and hundreds of millions of dollars, it took under 2 months to train and cost under, according to the company, under $6 million to train. When you download it, you can post-train it, and pre-trained transformer models need to be post-trained in order to be valuable. And the compute cost is a fraction. We're talking a few percentage points fraction of what it costs to use the large language models from the big hyperscalers and foundational model builders like OpenAI or Anthropic or any of the other large foundational model builders. So this cost savings, along with the basically lightweight of the model, meaning you can download it and run it on a laptop, has sent kind of shivers through the spines, because what this really means is there's a possible future where algorithmic efficiency beats brute force computation. And the entire AI industry in the United States and around the world has been thinking about high-level computation and big data centers and a lot of energy use and chips. And now they're thinking, maybe not.
So it's a really good one to look at in terms of the numbers, because you're saying, and DeepSeek saying, that they spent just $5.6 million on this new AI model. Meta last week said it would spend upward of $65 billion. How come DeepSeek was able to crack this code and do it so much more efficiently, and the big guys in the US unable to do so?
First of all, it's hard to speculate, but let's just say the following. There is a cliche that I believe is a cliche for a reason. There are more honors students in China than there are students in the United States. You're talking about a very deep pool of very smart people. That's thing one. Two, they've been restricted from getting all of the tools they need from the West, including specifically the kind of chips that would do the computation they need to do the advanced computation. This is a mathematical solution to a hardware problem. It's called algorithmic efficiency. They've actually written code that's more efficient than the code that's being used generally in the space throughout the world. So how did they do it? It's open source. You can see their research. They've been very good and transparent about publishing their research. They haven't exactly shown the secret sauce, but it is something that we'll be able to replicate. And by the way, the markets are reacting in a knee-jerk, and most people don't understand any of what I'm about to say to you. No one in the United States, no American, no company anywhere on earth, to be fair, is going to lay down and die because a couple of engineers figured out a better algorithm. Math is math, and engineering is engineering, and these algorithmic efficiency approaches will be figured out worldwide. Now, what does that mean for NVIDIA's chip prices? What does that mean for nuclear power plants, for data centers? What does that mean for future data centers? The jury's still out. By the way, no one's replicated this. For all we know, this is the Sputnik moment, or this is the cyber Pearl Harbor where they faked this whole thing and it really wasn't done for $5.5 million in 2 months. We don't know. My guess is it was done for $6 million, and was done in 2 months. That's my guess. And we're all going to have to rise to the challenge. And by the way, I am confident that everybody will.
Yeah, this is the thing. We were talking about the race, the AI race, and I think this is pretty much indicative of the race that has truly just begun. As you say, you can crack this code. If it's a mathematical solution, then you've got people that could work on it. But you touched on something in terms of the hardware and the GPUs and NVIDIA and so forth, and even what it means for electricity consumption for data centers. If what we're hearing from DeepSeek is in fact all factual, what does it actually mean? Does this change the calculation completely for AI?
So at the moment, it is much less expensive to run DeepSeek R1 locally than it is to, or even in the cloud, than it is to run any of the other models. So the question is not, is this better or worse? The question is, going forward, is algorithmic efficiency, this ability to run smaller models more efficiently, going to be a better path forward than the brute force massive compute models that we've used so far at OpenAI and Anthropic and at Google Gemini and at Llama, for Meta's Llama? We don't know the answer to that. Right now, it points towards two futures. One future is algorithmic efficiency. The other is brute force compute. There's no one in the world who can answer this question right now. It's all speculation. Time will tell. And as you've just said, it's very early days. This is like the beginning of the race. We're nowhere near the end of this race. We've never seen anything come this quickly. We've never seen exponential improvement that has really hit us at this speed. So it's accelerating, and we're going to all learn together. That's just the way it's going to go. And the markets are going to follow along because markets do that.
There was a headline that kind of came out of this that was kind of like, hey, DeepSeek duplicated OpenAI for $5 million. And everyone's told, I do not think they duplicated OpenAI for $5 million. Number two, look, I think the models that they built are fantastic. They're really, really good, but I don't think they're miracles. We can talk about why. And number three, finally, like, I think the panic, and there's clearly a full-blown on panic going on over the weekend and into this morning. I think it's overblown. I think, I do not think that DeepSeek is the doomsday for AI infrastructure.
For those of you for those of you out on radio, on YouTube, you can see a space shuttle behind a gentleman from MIT. I didn't even know that. I lived that, Stacy, and we were certain it worked until the heat panels didn't work in January of 1986. Do we have a certitude that this stuff is going to work for NVIDIA or Microsoft or the other 14 names you follow?
I cover 10 names. Microsoft and some of the others are covered by my colleagues that cover semiconductors. When you talk about work, like, I don't understand what you mean. But the question here is, these models look really efficient, and the resources that were required to train them, look lower than what we've seen from some other models in the past. And then we can look at where they're actually pricing the stuff, and they're pricing it at levels that are quite a bit lower, where, say, OpenAI makes their models available if you want to go use them. And so the question is, given all of that, do you need fewer GPUs? Right? That's the big question, and fewer infrastructure build-outs and everything else. And so, I mean, just to talk about this, like, what have they done? Right? They've got two flavors of models. They've got something called V3, which is sort of like a chat model. It uses something called a mixture of experts that makes it very efficient. And they've got a reasoning model called O1, where they used reinforcement learning and some other techniques from the V3 base model to build rivals to, say, to OpenAI's O1 reasoning model. If you look at the why they're so efficient in terms of the training that they did on, and the compute resources they used to train the V3 models, it's very efficient. They compared it to, say, like Llama 405B, and it took roughly 10% of the compute resources to train it than Meta's Llama 405B did. However, the structure of the model that makes sense. It uses something called a mixture of experts. That's the whole point. Other mixture of experts models that are out there, take anywhere from, a 6 to 1/7 as mount compute resources. This is a good one. It was like 1/10 or even better than that. But I don't think it's a miracle. And you got to remember, I'm a semiconductor analyst. Like, for 50 years, costs in semiconductors got cut in half. Like, for every 2 years for 50 years. That was not a bad thing for semiconductor, man. That was a good thing. We all want adoption. To get adoption, we need lower costs. This is something called Jevons paradox, right? Like, increasing efficiency drives actually more demand, more net demand, not less demand. I'm a firm believer in that. I have a strong suspicion that if we can free up more compute resources, it will get used. Like, I don't think we're anywhere close to the end of compute needs for artificial intelligence. And we're going to need this, just given, I mean, the costs have been going up next year, right? We need this.
Paul, jump in here, but anytime anybody quotes William Stanley Jevons on the show, they get to come back.
They get to come back. Stacey, what do you expect to hear from the semiconductor companies that you cover in terms of their response to this news, whether it's NVIDIA or others?
Yeah, well, I mean, so we're in the middle of earnings season right now, so we'll see as they come out, right? But we forget the semiconductor companies for a minute. We've already seen like some of the other like responses, and you have to remember everything that we've seen DeepSeek doing. Like, I don't want to dismiss it. Like they're really good and very efficient. They're very smart engineers. But these are not things that are not known, and these are not things that like the other top tier AI researchers and AI labs are not aware of and potentially already using themselves, right? And if we look at what we saw last week on top of all of this, clearly spending is going up, not down. So Meta just significantly increased their CapEx, I think, on Friday, right? We had the whole Stargate announcement, $500 billion, whatever that is. And even China a few days ago announced a 1 trillion yuan, which is about $140 billion US, sort of like sovereign, like AI effort, right? So like clearly spending is still going up, not down.
Let's talk about DeepSeek, because it is mind-blowing and it is shaking this entire industry to its core. The emergence of DeepSeek now putting pressure on the U.S. tech names. We told you all about it last week in Davos. The buzz started growing about DeepSeek's latest AI model being more efficient while running on a lot less advanced NVIDIA chips. Released last week, it's already being called what is a major breakthrough as the app shows its work, its reasoning, it answers users' prompts. I, by the way, was spent basically all weekend playing with it. It is the #1 app, I believe, on Apple right now. The product overtaking ChatGPT today as that on the App Store that way. DeepSeek, which was created by a Chinese hedge fund manager, also capturing the attention of leaders, as we mentioned at the World Economic Forum last week in Davos.
We should take the development out of China very, very seriously.
What we found is that DeepSeek, which is the leading Chinese AI lab, their model is actually the top performing, or roughly on par with the best American models.
If the United States can't lead in this technology, we're going to be in a very bad place geopolitically.
Now, you can take a look right now at the AI-related stocks. So NVIDIA, ARM, AMD, Microsoft, Meta, interestingly, on that list, given its open source. We got to talk about the open source, closed source bit of this as well.
And then that's a shocker to see NVIDIA down by more than 12% right now.
Absolutely. And then you have global chip stocks also in the red across the board, ASML Holdings and others. There is the question, I will say, Alexander Wang made the point last week, and it's become sort of the question mark about all of this, which is, he suggested on our air that it is possible that they were using some of the highest performing NVIDIA chips, perhaps as many as 50,000 of them, to build this model. Now, and they weren't supposed to have those chips.
Right. If
that's true,
not the size.
The dynamic is different. Yeah. If it's not true, then maybe all bets are off. It's possible, by the way, even if it is true, meaning even if they use those chips to create this, or at least partially to create this, it is still a significantly more efficient and better model. I think everybody agrees that right this moment, I mean, I don't know if did you get to play? It is mind-blowing.
It looks really great. I mean, it feels like it's open source, so people can test this out themselves.
But I can tell you all the tests that I do just to see whether I think the writing is better, whether I think that it can answer certain questions. Yeah. I mean, it was not only faster, it was more human. The reasoning is shocking. I mean, there were moments where I was like, oh my God. We are so much. You could feel the step change as a person. I will also say, as exciting as it was, there was an element where I became scared because I thought, I had the opportunity to talk to all these people last week, and they all said the future's here and da-da-da-da. And then you sort of see it, and you go, oh, okay, I feel you, in a different sort of visceral way. So yes, I think this is all happening at a level that when you mark your sort of AI history timeline in life, I think this past week, today, and everything else will be on it.
I think Mark Andreessen put it really succinctly and really smartly when he said that this feels like the Sputnik moment for the AI race, where China is really stepping in. So not just what it can do, but what it means for American dominance in AI, what it means for the Chinese being able to step in, and to have the Chinese actually open sourcing it, meaning that that is going to be what goes around the world, and to have the cost factors that go into this. Huge, huge step up and change, and puts us a little bit on our back foot in trying to figure out what this means. Well, I actually wonder, Satya Nadella, would he tell you again today that he's still good for the $80 billion?
I think they still are good for the $80 billion. I think actually everybody's, I think the processing power issue is there's an element of which you're going to still have to have the current sort of efforts underway. I think the question longer term, I think it's a longer term question.
Can you recoup your investment? I mean, can you recoup your investment if that's the case?
Well, I think this is the big issue. And I think
who's going to pay for it if they get it?
At one point, and I don't know if we talked about it on Squawk or it might have been on Worldwide Exchange, one of the things that I was hearing that was fascinating out there is there were so many CEOs who were saying, you know what, I'm using OpenAI and I'm playing around with Anthropic to figure out what I need to do. And then, which is expensive for us, and we don't really love that. So we're playing around with what we need, and then we're trying to figure out how much of it we can replicate using Llama, which is the Meta version of it, but it's open source and effectively, therefore, free.
Well, and you can have some control over it, too, as being open source. You can do things that you end up this way. You're not so beholden to OpenAI.
But to me, that's the issue. So here we have a situation where if people are already starting to move towards open source models, and I don't think that have been talked about publicly, really. That's a whole kind of paradigm change.
Just back to the question on Microsoft. Microsoft shares down 6.8% this morning. Is there a point where Satya says, okay, maybe I'm not good for the $80 billion?
I don't know. I think he's still going to need this technology over the next 5 years. The question is, can he go, is he going to start using DeepSeek? By the way, there's a separate question, which is, if we think we have a problem with TikTok.
Oh, I thought this instantaneously.
If we think we have a problem with TikTok, do we have a problem with this? Now, interestingly, this is an open source model.
You can take it and do your own stuff with it.
You can put it on your own
So they're not
computers.
owning your... Unless there's something in it that we don't understand.
Right. They talk about Project Texas with...
But I thought the same thing.
It on your own.
TikTok looks like poser's play compared to what this could potentially be. Although this is OpenAI, so you can take it and source it yourself and figure something out from it. So you're not storing it on their servers.
Anyway, it's fascinating. I think if you're... I don't know. We should call Satya, get him back, because the truth is he does need some form of AI, for his Copilot and all of his other software.
Sure. But does it have to be...
Does it have to be OpenAI?
And is there a way to do it more cheaply and not have to spend $80 billion?
I think the question is probably that over time they're going to have to spend less money. I don't know if you saw, he put out a tweet just overnight called, I didn't know about this, it's called the Jevons Paradox. And he links to a Wikipedia page, which I'll read to everybody if you'd like. In economics, the Jevons paradox, sometimes referred to as the Jevons effect, occurs when technological progress increases the efficiency with which a resource is used, reducing the amount of necessary for any one use, but the falling cost of use induces increased demand, enough that resources used is increased rather than reduced.
Could be, but does he still need to spend $80 billion to get to the same place? Could he spend $50 billion and still get the same out of it if you can find ways to do this more cheaply, if the architecture structure is such that you can actually get more efficient with all of these things, maybe he doesn't have to spend the $80 billion to get to that point.
I think he may still need to, just because of the abundance of how much processing power. I mean, look, the guys who are, this DeepSeek, for the most part, people are now running on their own laptops and doing all sorts of things, so their computers are not overwhelmed. But if you decided you were doing this in the cloud, or there was going to be a cloud-based version of it, you'd still need a lot of processing power. I will say, just on top of his tweet, and this was just 5 hours ago, he says, the Jevons paradox strikes again. As AI gets more efficient and accessible, we will see its use skyrocket, turning it into a commodity.
Correct.
We just can't get enough of, though. And so they just can't get enough of piece of it may be the thing that hopefully helps them longer term, but still, I think it's a big question.
Right, and if you're doing it so that consumers are basically doing this for free, it's just who's paying the way on this? Are companies going to pay? Are they going to find cheaper ways to run some of this stuff themselves, too?
Good morning from our global headquarters in New York. I'm Manus Cranny alongside Danny Berger. You're welcome to Bloomberg Brief. Let's set that agenda.
A global risk sell-off. NASDAQ futures fall more than 3%. Bonds rally. The 2025 optimism for markets gets a challenge from tariffs and tech. U.S. tech exceptionalism threatened by Chinese AI startup DeepSeek with a cost-effective solution for AI. And a compromise agreed in the standoff between President Trump and Colombia on the threat of sweeping tariffs. Good morning, Manus.
Danny, good morning. The first grey swan of 2025 afflicting NVIDIA and the global tech market. We're now down 10%. $300 billion worth of market cap has been wiped off NVIDIA and counting. There's one word, DeepSeek. Go Google it. Chinese startup, more effective AI, cost-effective, less power. Roll it over and have a look at the effect on equity markets. NASDAQ down 3.4%. We've now almost wiped out the gains of 2025. Last week, we talked about Goldilocks on steroids. Is that challenged? We've only seen drops of 3%, 3 times in 2024. Ground zero, as equities come under pressure in this grey swan moment, you go straight to the bond market. We are seeing yields fall. The question is the scale of the existential angst from the equity market as yields drop by 8 basis points, Danny, in the bond market.
Yeah, if you thought you were going to get a quiet start to what otherwise will be a busy week, you've been sorely mistaken this morning.
Mistaken.
There are also some other stocks, a lot of stocks that have been selling off with the DeepSeek concern that's been coming through. ASML is one of them. Let's just get the pre-market check on that, Manus. Those shares are off 10.7%.
Other stocks, the question is this about the moat around U.S. exceptionalism of NVIDIA and therefore the moat around all the other majors in the tech sector. Broadcom also falling again on these AI concerns as a result of, you got it, DeepSeek.
And just all those big spenders also falling, Microsoft being one of them. Any of the ones that have been spending a lot of AI falling, Microsoft off nearly 5% in the pre-market session.
Also coming up, we'll catch up with Ella Hodja of Newton Investment Management. Amy Wu-Silverman, if you want to understand volatility, join in at 5:30. RBC Capital Markets 101. That's a 101 for vol.
One of my favorite things that anyone has written about this is James Van Gielen of Citrini Research saying, picks and shovels to dig your own grave.
Exactly.
That's what we're seeing, the questioning of the picks and shovels trade, which had been so popular. Not even just that, but of tech in general, of the heavy valuations. We had said that valuations are high. Once they come off, it will be painful. Is this the thing? Mark Andreessen calling it the Sputnik moment for AI. Someone else saying that this is Silicon Valley Bank for AI. It is finally, as you put it, a gray swan that's going to be forcing a sell-off.
The question is, does it metastasize into something much more aggressive on a competitive threat to the landscape of U.S.? That moat, everybody talks about the moat around NVIDIA. That has had a fissure. The question is whether that fissure turns into the moment of a dike that actually blows apart. You just think of, I love what one of the notes came through, said, this is the Texas Hold'em moment for U.S. tech. In other words, throwing everything at the wall, from Stargate announcement to Meta, doubling its AI expenditure last week. Well, if you suddenly got a competitor that can produce at much less cost, and it's open source, and this is what you and I talked about this morning. So there's a whole host of issues that can build the story for DeepSeek.
Well, this is the thing. I think today is just kind of sell everything, sell all tech as you try to understand this. But as we try to understand this, are things going to merge that say maybe this isn't bad news for them? Maybe this isn't bad news for these companies that have been plowing so much money into capital expenditures. This is cheaper. This is more efficient. Hey, maybe this changes from, again, not picks and shovel anymore, but to the commodification of AI, that other companies now have access to AI. And if you can figure out how to implement it and use it cheaply because of DeepSeek, maybe it's a boon to your bottom line.
Okay, well, let's talk about it a little bit more. It is the top story. It is the Chinese AI startup. If you want to go off and Google it now, if you don't know about them, DeepSeek is the name. It's rocking global technology markets, raising questions over that American dominance, the moat. The buzz grew over the weekend that the company's latest AI model poses a threat to the U.S. industry, as we've been saying, to NVIDIA. Tom McKenzie is tracking this story. So, Tom, I put it out there that this is a grey swan moment. This story has been bubbling. Just put in context, what is DeepSeek offering to the world? Let's just put a framework around it.
Look, I think the grey swan is a really nice framing of this, and you have both touched on some key points around this story. This is a company, it's a model, it's a research lab set up in the early 2020s by a hedge fund guy, done very well. He's built AI into his hedge fund for a long time down in Hangzhou, and then he use some of that funding to build out a research lab. And they dropped this latest model on the 20th of January. And to your point, it's about cost and it's about efficiency and about capabilities. And they claim that they spent just about $6 million, and they did it in 2 months. 2 months, $6 million. And that, of course, compares to the $80 billion number that we're hearing from in terms of Microsoft, in terms of how they plan to spend around CapEx to build on some of their models around AI. So it's the cost, it's the efficiency, and it's the capabilities. And on many metrics, DeepSeek is meeting, if not surpassing, the metrics of OpenAI, Anthropic, and Meta's Llama models as well. Does the innovation around AI stop here? No, it could well be accelerated, to Danny's point, but it does raise serious questions about the supply chain supporting that AI innovation.
Well, it certainly is this idea, Tom, that you're working under constraints, and something about that is the mother of all invention, that you do this with much less money. Tom, there's reporting from the information over the weekend that Meta has set up at least 4 war rooms to try to analyze what is going on. What are the consequences? You could kind of understand for NVIDIA that maybe this is bad, not as many people need their most expensive chips, but what about for tech as a whole? What about the Mag 7?
Well, we already know that Silicon Valley and many builders, app developers and product developers out there are using and have been using DeepSeek's models. It is being dispersed through the ecosystem in Silicon Valley and more broadly as well. So you could get apps and systems and services produced more quickly, more efficiently, and that could be beneficiary, of course, a benefit to those who are buying them and producing them. But it does pose a key question around whether or not that demand, and this comes back to the valuation story for NVIDIA, trading at 33 times, whether or not that demand for the high-end GPUs, the Blackwells, is going to be there if you can build models with these kind of capabilities on more, quote-unquote, legacy chips. As you say, China has been forced with its back to the wall and has had to innovate. They've brought on these systems engineers at DeepSeek, and they have managed to build out a system, it seems, if you trust the data and what is out there on the open source building blocks of this model, that they have managed to do that with chips that are far less sophisticated than the AI accelerated GPUs that NVIDIA sells.
It's just a great example of when your back is against the wall, you really do, you know, the mother of all invention is oppression. What are the geopolitical issues here? We've seen the eruption over TikTok, but the difference, as Danny and I were chatting about this morning when we came in, this is open source. This is a structurally different product. For the world, relative to perhaps the national security interests around TikTok.
Yeah, what does it mean around the spend for the lithography machines that ASML makes? And that's what's being questioned in the markets right now. What does it mean for the supply of GPUs from NVIDIA? What does it mean about the energy spend as well with those companies like Microsoft who are spending on nuclear power going forward years and have made those commitments already? Those are the question marks. And then on the geopolitics, we saw how the Biden administration responded when Bloomberg discovered through its own reporting that Huawei had developed a very sophisticated chip using SMIC and equipment in mainland China. They responded with further restrictions. Does the Trump administration to look to that as the playbook? Are we looking at further restrictions to try and clamp off even more of this technology? How far and how broad does the Trump administration go in response to this?
Tom, I think your first point is such a good one. Everyone's been clamoring on about how the trades du jour are picks and shovels, infrastructure, data centers. Does all of that now get questioned? Tom McKenzie, excellent reporting. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll catch up with you later on the show as well. Tom McKenzie there of Bloomberg. Okay, let's get you now some other top stories that are trending on the terminal this morning. China's economic activity surprisingly faltered at the start of the year. Factory activity shrank in January. Chinese industrial firms also reported the third straight quarter of declining profits. That underscored the risk that the world's #2 economy might be stalling again.
Bitcoin dipping below $100,000 on Friday. President Trump ordered the creation of a working group to advise the White House on crypto policy. A long-awaited executive action, the order stopped short of confirming that the U.S. would establish a Bitcoin reserve, something Trump had vowed to do on the campaign trail.
And Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency is now officially online. A government job site to recruit full-time software engineers and other tech staffers is up. Applicants must be U.S. citizens, and apart from a resume and a commitment to working in the office, they're asked to list up to 3 items that, quote, show exceptional ability.
Coming up in the show, Ella Hodger of Newton Investment Management on why we may not find the U.S. is in as strong a position as it was last year.
It's your Bloomberg brief. Danny Berger and Manish Cranny in New York as tech gets a big shake over the weekend. People analyzing the new open source model coming from a Chinese hedge fund, DeepSeek. Let's take a look at tech this morning, Manis. NVIDIA selling off quite dramatically, some 10% it's down. This also calls